Welcome to our webinar, A Strategy for Powerful Practical E-Learning. Do you have one? My name is Roger Blair, and I'm Vice President of Sales with Innovative Learning Group, and I am delighted to be here today with CEO Lisa Toenniges and Lead Programmer and Learning Technology Consultant Matt Kurtin. Lisa and Matt will be covering the key components needed for you to make thoughtful and strategic decisions so that you can effectively create a powerful and practical e-learning strategy. But before we get started, I'd like to take just a couple of minutes to tell you a little bit about Innovative Learning Group.
The Pew's Capital.
We're a 7-year-old company located in Royal Oak, Michigan, kind of a cool happening spot located just north of Detroit, Michigan. And we are experts in all aspects of training and performance support. And we create learning strategies, we build curriculum architecture, and we do a lot of design and development. And more, we're creating performance support solutions, and now we're into mobile. And what we really care about and what really differentiates us is our focus on getting business results. And in other words, helping organizations reach their business goals. As you'll see, we work with a diverse group of medium and large-sized companies across the country, some of which we also serve on a global basis. In short, we can supply any learning and performance needs our clients may have. And we'd love to talk to you about how we might help your organization as well. Our contact information will appear at the end of this session, and we invite you to contact us. Now, just a couple of notes before we start. I want to make sure that you printed or at least have access to the e-learning organizational assessment handout and the slides. Now, these were sent to you in your reminder notice on July 26th. Now, next, we invite you throughout the session to feel free and speak up with any questions and provide any comments that you may have. Now, in addition, we're going to be recording the session and posting it on YouTube. So we ask that you not give your full name or company name when asking or answering questions. Now, immediately following the webinar, you will receive an email with a link to a short survey, and we'd greatly appreciate it if you would take a little bit of time and complete that and return that to us. And early next week, we'll send you the link to the YouTube. And now I'm pleased to introduce our presenters, Lisa Toenniges and Matt Kurtin. Lisa is the owner and CEO of Innovative Learning Group, and she has a master's degree in instructional technology from Wayne State University in Detroit, and has over 20 years' experience in this field, both as an internal consultant and on the vendor side. Lisa is a certified performance technologist as endorsed by the International Society for Performance Improvement, ISPI, and has been very involved in ISPI for 20 years. She is past president of the Michigan chapter and is currently a director and treasurer on the international board. Now, Lisa has led teams in the development of learning and e-learning strategies and has managed numerous web-based training programs. Now, Matt Kurtin is ILG's lead programmer and learning technology consultant. He's been with ILG since we began in 2004, and he has a master's degree in electrical engineering from Virginia Polytechnic Institute and State University. Matt has more than 15 years' experience developing e-learning courses, learning management systems, and e-learning strategies, and he's authored more than 200 e-learning courses himself. Now, Matt has served as a judge for the Brandon Hall Group's Excellence in Learning Awards program for 6 years and is currently serving in his second year as a senior judge in that competition. And now on to our session, and Lisa and Matt.
Well, thank you, Roger, and good afternoon, everybody. We're thrilled to have such a great turnout. Let's start right out with a question for all of you. So this is going to be the first of a number of polling questions we'll ask today, so we can all learn from each other and get a sense of what's going on in all of our organizations. The first question you see on the screen, are you finding that making decisions on the fly regarding e-learning is costing you time and money and reducing quality? So go ahead and make your selection, yes or no, and click Submit. All right, it looks like most of the responses are in, and it looks like the majority of you are thinking that yes, at this point it is costing you time and money and perhaps reducing quality. And I'd agree, without a plan in place, you're probably working inefficiently, you're probably buying the wrong things, or perhaps you're buying many of the same redundant things. And most likely you're jeopardizing quality in the process. So to get us in the mindset for today's discussion, what I want you to do is go ahead and read the description of both learning functions that you see on the slide for Learning Function 1 and Learning Function 2, and then we'll have another polling question to ask you which function you'd like to be a part of. So go ahead and read that slide. All right, go ahead and wrap up your reading. And we'll switch to the polling question. So, would you prefer to work in Learning Function 1 or 2? And feel free to look back at your slide 8 if you printed them, just as a reminder. Go ahead and make your choice. What did I do? All right. I agree. Yep. I would agree also. I'd like to work as well in Learning Function 2. I mean, what do you see are the differences, right? Either people had the right skills or they didn't have the right skills. People either had or didn't have the right authoring tools, either didn't have any templates that were helpful. The LMS was either robust or not robust, and, teams were following common processes or not. So in this case, I agree. Clearly, Learning Function 2 was the better place to be. So thanks for chiming in so quickly on those couple initial polling questions. On the screen now you see our webinar topics for today, and these appeared in the promotional materials, so I'm guessing these kind of resonated with you, and therefore you decided to be with us today. So let's take a look. Today we'll be determining if your e-learning is working culturally for your organization. We'll be examining your decisions regarding buying or building e-learning. We'll be assessing your e-learning processes and tools and standards. We'll be evaluating your hosting. We'll be measuring the effectiveness of your tracking tools. We'll look at compiling a list of the do's and don'ts for using your LMS. And finally, choosing the best suite of authoring tools. How do these sound? Pretty good? Excellent. I'll take that as a yes. All right, and on to another polling question just to give us a sense of who's on the webinar with us today. So here's the question. Have you been involved in planning for e-learning? Yes or no? All right, everyone, most everyone on this call. Excellent. That will give us lots of experience to draw on. Okay, and one more question. Have you been involved in actually creating e-learning? And then we'd like to know a little bit more about the role or the position that you've held while you were doing that. Go ahead and make your selection. All right. Lots of instructional designers, quite a few project managers that I'm guessing are also have some experience with instructional design. Very good. So that'll give us quite a bit of meat to jump into things today. All right, I think it's important that as a first step here that we discuss some of the benefits of planning. If we think back to Learning Function 1 and some of the things, that they didn't do so well, we're all quickly reminded of some of the benefits of planning for your e-learning. Let's talk about some of these benefits in the categories that you see on the screen. Better product, save time, save money, and less frustration. Matt, why don't you start us off here with better product?
Thanks, Lisa. Obviously, planning leads to better e-learning. If you plan to match your infrastructure, then your e-learning is going to function better. For example, courses could load faster, or when the learner clicks, the right thing will happen. Planning also leads to more engaging e-learning, better navigation, and more standardization. How about saving time?
Absolutely. I mean, certainly doing some planning is going to help you save time. With some planning, you'll have more streamlined processes. You won't have wasted steps. There won't be missing steps. You'll have less rework. In other words, less spinning of your wheels, less going back because it wasn't the right thing. People will have the right skills. They'll be, real fluent with the tasks they need to do. People will have the right tools. They're not always fighting to make a given tool work and do what they need it to do. And certainly you'll have fewer false starts. Every effort counts, and you want to be able to move Move the project forward, not be cycling back. Matt, how about some tips on saving money?
Well, of course, planning is going to save money because of less rework, and then you've got fewer redundant software applications and a better use of your talent.
So what we see on the screen next, right? Less frustration. This is certainly one of my favorites. With some planning, we'll certainly have less of this. People will have the appropriate tools, they'll have the right skills, and they'll know the processes. So are you noticing we're kind of seeing the same benefits over and over of doing some planning? Let's pause for a minute here, and I'd love to hear you shout out and hear your actual pieces. What are some of the questions you have so far? Anyone willing to chime in? All right, let's go ahead then with our first topic. I think we agree that some of the planning is probably a good idea. Before you get too far, you need to almost stop and ask yourself whether or not your organization is a good candidate for e-learning. The people on the slide are suggesting a few of the questions you might want to ask. Is there cultural readiness? Does e-learning make sense based on your audience size and location? Is there infrastructure available to deliver e-learning? Do you have buy-in and support from IS? Do you have performance and learning needs that are appropriate to teach using e-learning? And do you have support from HR? Let's take a few minutes and we'll go through and we'll discuss each one of these questions individually. So the first one, as you see next to the arrow here, is there cultural readiness? What we mean here are people ready to learn over the computer? Are managers ready for their people to be learning over the computer? Perhaps sitting at their desks where they're normally on the job during working hours learning over the computer. The next question you see on the screen, does e-learning make sense based on your audience, location, and size? From a money standpoint, it makes most sense if you have a large geographically dispersed audience. It can be real expensive to fly people around the world to take classroom training, so companies are often turning to e-learning to save travel costs. So one question you want to ask is, where's your audience located? And unless the training will make the difference between life or death, you probably can't justify creating e-learning for an audience of 5 that are located, all in the same place. So a second question, how large is your audience? This really gets at the criticality or the importance factor when we do our analysis. Matt, how about our next question?
So the next question is there infrastructure available to deliver e-learning? What you've got to do is you've got to look at what's already available that perhaps you could tack onto, or you're going to need to buy something new. And when you start to look at what you might want to buy, you might be talking about things like authoring tools or learning management systems, or maybe lower level things like the appropriate network bandwidth. These types of things are pretty expensive, and the cost is high enough that the learning department is not going to be able to go it alone and needs to work together with IT. But then to get on the radar screen with IT, it's got to be important enough, and once it does get on, it's going to compete with the other corporate technology priorities. So that leads to the next question, do you have buy-in and support from IT? Do you have good relationships with the folks over there? And the tricky part here is that usually IT is going to understand the infrastructure, but not what the learning function needs to achieve. And while the learning function understands the e-learning goals, they don't understand the infrastructure. So you really have got to have the people willing to collaborate and understand each other's world and what's best for your organization. And it can be challenging because you're going to find probably that the IT folks are pretty protective about any new software that's going to go on their network.
The next question is probably one of the most important considerations. Do you have performance and learning needs that are appropriate to teach using e-learning? E-learning isn't the right delivery method for all learning needs. You should really start by looking at your major audiences for learning and what types of learning needs they have. For example, if the majority of your learning needs are around leadership and various soft skills, e-learning is probably not your best option. Many sales skills are not best taught by e-learning either. However, if many of your learning needs are around using software and following specific procedures, e-learning is a great delivery method. So generally, determining these learning needs and delivery methods is what you do when you're doing a curriculum architecture. So if you don't have a curriculum architecture in place, you'll probably want to get started on that. And one final question here regarding is your organization a good candidate for e-learning is whether or not you have support from HR. Do the people in HR agree that e-learning is one good option for delivering training? They're generally the ones, that are putting performance management systems and individual development planning processes in place. So you want to make sure that they're on board and supportive. And if after you've answered all the questions and decided your organization is right for e-learning, then it makes great sense to go on with your planning. Throughout our workshop today, we're going to use a 7-part scenario to illustrate some of these concepts. The scenario is based on a fictional company called Global Data Technologies, or GDT. And there may be some other companies with the same name or similar name, but the scenario is not based on these companies. We just wanted to pick a name that sounded real. All right, so let me read part 1 of our scenario, and then we're going to have a polling question about whether or not GDT is a good candidate for e-learning. So we're going to tie each part of our scenario back to the topic we just covered. All right, so here we go. Global Data Technologies, as its name suggests, provides data processing services. It has offices in 12 countries, approximately 7,000 employees, and revenue of about $3.5 billion. It's very much a company of knowledge workers, and the majority of the employees are in their 20s and 30s. Due to the type of work GDT does, there are quite a number of information technology experts at the company, and they put a strong emphasis on data security. There's a culture of collaboration, and employees network and work easily across functions. Many of the performance and learning needs are related to learning new software applications and staying current on policies and procedures and other security and compliance. The human resources function is headed by an individual with a background in behavioral analysis, instructional design, and performance improvement. She's been the project lead herself on a number of blended training solution programs and really understands the value of selecting the right delivery method based on the learning objectives. Okay, so our polling question is coming up. Is global data technologies a good candidate for e-learning? Yes or no? Make your suggestion. The responses are coming in. Flip back and look at the scenario if you need to. The majority of you are saying yes, answer A, and I would agree with that. They have cultural readiness based on the demographics of the audience and based on the core business, data processing. The size and location makes sense, as they have 7,000 employees all over the world. As an IT company, they clearly have the infrastructure in place. The cultural description suggests they work well across the various functions. Learning new software and staying current on policies and procedures are a very appropriate topics for e-learning. And based on the background and expertise of the head of human resources, there's good support there also. So I think those of you that said yes, choice A, are right on. At this point now, we're going to toggle over and look at the handout called E-Learning Organizational Assessment. Again, hopefully you received this in our reminder notice on the 26th. So please go ahead and get this in front of you. We're also showing it on the screen as well. And we're going to use this assessment throughout the rest of our time together. Note that it's a tool that's going to get you thinking about what's happening in your organization. It's not necessarily a tool that's point-based, and it's not going to spit out at the end the exact right direction you should go. But it's certainly going to give you, a great deal of insight on some of your options. And I'm hoping that this is a useful tool, back on the job, and perhaps you and your manager or you and a group of learning people will use this as you go down the path and try to figure out e-learning for your function. So right now we're on page 1, and we're going to look at this first set of questions here. Is your organization a good candidate for e-learning? And for this subset of questions, you'll notice that they perfectly align with the questions we went over. So this is really your tool and your worksheet after the webinar here to think through for your function if your organization is really a good candidate for e-learning. So we're at the end of our first topic, Might I entertain some questions now? Anyone willing to chime in and ask something?
This is Carolee, and I have a question about multiple languages.
Sure, go ahead.
And so if I do have an organization that's a good candidate for most of my populations, let's say I have large groups that speak 3 languages, but then I have 17 more languages, how do I cope with that?
And cope with it regarding what?
With developing e-learning or something for them.
Right. So, part of it's right whether you have resources, time and money to develop for all the audiences. Have you ever tried to do all 20 languages, or is that prohibitive?
No, it's cost prohibitive.
We have some clients that do as many as 20 languages. It's really putting quite a rigorous process and tool set and standards in place. And then you do the English version first and then follow your process to do the other languages.
And we'll touch some later when we get to talking about authoring tools, about how choosing the right authoring tools can make your life easier when you're in that situation as well.
Great, thank you.
You're right. There's a couple of things. Number one, when you develop the master version, the English version, if you know you're going to translate, there's certainly some things you should do when you do the master version. And then you're going to follow your process to do the other languages. Thanks for chiming in. Anyone else?
Hey, this is Sue, and I'm wondering if all the attendees today are going to receive a copy of this assessment.
Yes, you are. In fact, you should have, if you registered for the webinar, you should have received a reminder email on July 26th that had a link to both the slides we're showing as well as the assessment.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you.
Very good. All right, let's go ahead to our next topic then. Who will develop your e-learning? So something else you're going to need to figure out is how you'll procure e-learning, or who will develop your e-learning. Why is this important? Well, because depending on if you'll buy something externally or build it yourself, it really dictates what skills you have and what types of software you can use and how long it may take you to develop e-learning. Something to keep in mind, at this point, if you're thinking about who will develop the e-learning, you really need to already understand at a macro level the types of performance and learning needs you have. That's that curriculum architecture I mentioned a few minutes ago. So you see the options that we have on the slide. How can you develop e-learning? Well, you can buy off the shelf. You can use internal resources. You can use vendors. You can use interns. Or you can certainly use a mix. So let's go ahead and discuss some of the pros and cons for each of these categories. Off the shelf. By this I mean products that are already created and commercially available. These are usually on generic topics, things like communication skills or time management. Some of the pros of this are they're less expensive, the courses are already created. One of the cons is it's usually one size fits all. Of course, if you can buy it commercially, it's not customized to your organization. One of your next options is to build your e-learning internally. And here I mean using the people you have on your staff or inside your organization. So a couple of pros of this is you can control everything. And you can keep all you're keeping all the costs inside. Some of the cons are you don't necessarily have the specialized skill sets on staff or internally that you need. And you may or may not agree there's often, task interference. I'm sure all of you get invited to lots of meetings and perhaps may have some distractions while you might be trying to develop e-learning. Another option is to use a vendor. By here I mean an external option, a company or a freelancer that really specializes in this area of e-learning. Some of the pros are this is what they do for a living, and often they can handle a high volume if that's what's needed. One of the cons is they may not know your business very well, and they also may not know your infrastructure very well. A couple of things you'll want to if you're going to go this route of using vendors. First, you'll want to make sure that you have a good vendor selection process in place. And then you need to manage the vendor and provide a good link into your organization, because the vendor is going to need help. What are your processes? How are they going to access the SMEs? How are they going to access IT, or perhaps in your corporate communications or brandings group? Those will all ensure the likelihood that the vendor can be more successful. Another option then is to use interns. This is temporary help. Often maybe young people or people newer to the field that are looking to get some real-world experience. Some pros of this: it may be lower costs. They're often willing to try new things, and they could very well, coming right out of school, have a real specialized skill set. Some of the cons are this: they probably don't have a lot of experience, and they may need a fair amount of direction you'll need to provide. Certainly the right answer for your organization might be to use a mix of these options we've just discussed. You might develop some internally and some externally, and you might do this based on the skill and or the capacity needs that you have. By capacity, I mean, do you have enough staff to create the volume of e-learning that you have? And it always makes sense, like we said, to buy anything that's off the shelf, or to use off-the-shelf products for generic topics. All right, we're ready for part 2 of our scenario with global data technologies. And then we'll have a polling question, and we'll ask how you think GDT might procure and or build their e-learning. So here we go. At GDT, the leadership has always focused on its core competencies. GDT secures services from outside vendors for services needed, but not directly related to what they do. And the company has a strong project management office and a large pool of seasoned project managers. These individuals are very experienced in defining user needs and systems requirements. They also understand quite a bit about human behavior and how individuals interface with systems. So our polling question: what might be the best approach to procure and or develop e-learning? Buy off-the-shelf courses, outsource the high-level e-learning, use the project managers to manage the vendors, use the project managers to build simple courses, or all of the above. Go ahead and make your selection. The responses are coming in quickly. I would agree, absolutely. E, all of the above. These are all good options. Buying off-the-shelf courses on generic topics always makes sense. Outsourcing moderate and high-level e-learning courses makes sense, as it wants to focus on its core services of data security, not building high-level e-learning. Using existing project managers makes good sense, as they have this group of people on staff with the expertise, so why not use them? And because the project managers are very software savvy, they can easily learn the basic e-learning software applications to build those. So let's toggle then back to our e-learning organizational assessment. If you have the hard copy in front of you, we're on page 1 in the middle. And you also see on the screen, we're here at section 2. So our question is, what might be the best approach to procure and or develop e-learning? So now think about your organization for a minute. Do you have an internal learning function? If there's no learning function, or if you only have one person, it's going to make it tough to build much e-learning internally. The next item, do you have skilled and experienced e-learning project managers or instructional designers or programmers or graphic designers? You really should only tackle this if you have all the necessary skill sets, or if you're going to build something that's fairly low level. The next one, do you currently have the headcount to develop the volume of e-learning required by your learning strategy or curriculum architecture? For you, it could just be a capacity issue, not a skill issue. Do you have the necessary hardware and software to develop e-learning? Certainly it's easy enough to buy, but it takes time and money to buy the hardware and software you might not have now. Is your leadership interested in ramping up your department and new headcount? If it's a capacity issue, this will certainly solve that, but your organization needs to be willing to add that headcount. And finally, is your leadership interested in making the investment to purchase that necessary hardware and software? So again, I challenge you, after the webinar to think about these questions with some others in your organization, specific to your organization. Questions at this point you'd like to ask about procuring or developing e-learning and how best to figure that out? Alrighty, then we'll go ahead with our next topic for today, processes, tools, and standards. So as most of you know, it's easier to procure and develop classroom training or self-study training if you have great processes and tools and standards in place. So I'm guessing you'd agree it's the same really for e-learning. Let's break it down and talk about each of these categories you see on the screen: processes, tools, and standards. By process, I mean something like the ADDIE process that also includes your project management steps and any other steps that may be specific to your company, perhaps some specific purchasing steps that need to happen in your organization. You see an example of a simple process on the left side of your screen. And having processes in place does a few things for you. It maps out, it shows you the phases and steps and tasks and milestones and approval points. It will answer the question, that you see on your screen, the next bullet there, do you have clear roles and responsibilities? Those should be identified in your process maps. Will you use a rapid approach, or will you use a more kind of rigorous storyboard approach? It'll answer a question like, are you editing before or after programming? It'll answer a question, like, where are reviews and how many? So having a robust process clears up a lot of questions and a lot of things people may be asking or wondering or getting tripped up on. The next category here is tools. By tools, I mean things like job aids and templates. Right now, I'm not talking about authoring tools. We'll get to that later. What you see on the screen now is a portion of a project open checklist on the left side of your screen. This is a simple tool that we use here at Innovative Learning Group when we start a new project. You see some other tools here on the right side of your screen, other examples of excellent tools to help you. You might have standard interfaces, or a design document template, or a good verb job aid, how to write 3-part objectives job aid. Perhaps a storyboard template will be a huge asset to your department, or a learning management system checklist, what you need to do to load a course. You might have a usability checklist. What are you looking for in that pilot? The do's and don'ts of using media job aid. So I think there's a number of benefits of using all these tools. It makes it easier. You don't have to remember. And it gives everyone the same consistent starting place. I always feel, why start with a blank sheet of paper if you can start with something that already exists? So put those tools in place. And finally, put some standards in place. By standards for e-learning, I mean both technical standards and instructional standards. You see a clip of some technical standards on the right side of the screen. So technical standards look at, things like operating system, web servers, server-side components, file formats, and file sizes. Instructional standards look at things like, do all courses have learning objectives that start with an actionable, observable verb? Or do at least 25% of the class time, will that be spent on practice? Where you might have standards regarding that you really need to have transition statements between each slide. You might also have standards around testing, the number of questions you need to have, the percent that you need to get right in order to pass, or standards around things like font and font size and editorial things like the use of commas. So a strong learning function will have these standards documented and really expect that internal people and teams as well as vendors follow these standards. So if we're thinking about e-learning, it has a whole additional level of complexity. You may need to modify or expand your existing processes and tools and standards, and most likely add some new ones. And based on what you've decided during the previous topic about procuring and developing e-learning, you'll need to have these processes and tools and standards in place in order to be successful with your e-learning. At this point, I want to show you a demo of an interactive online performance support tool that we developed for one of our clients. So as you'll see for Consumers Energy, we worked with a team of people first to document their processes and tools and standards, and then we went ahead and built this to be an online version that lives on their intranet. So what you see across the top is just the simple process. Similar, I'm guessing you see the ADDIE model in here, and there's some nice animation. And then when you click on each phase, it drips down to the steps. So again, more detailed part of the process. And as we go over to outputs, you see the result or the output of each phase. And then finally, you see the tools that are aligned with each phase. So what we did is we came up with the process, we identified the steps and outputs, we identified the tools and created these tools. And if you were actually on the Consumers Energy intranet, you could click on one of those tools. For example, you could click on that project alignment checklist, and it would bring up an actual Microsoft Office document, for the most part, that then the user can do a save as on right to the network and begin using. So real performance support here. It also, emphasizes the importance of having this process and tool set and standards documented here. So let's go on and do part 3 of our scenario with global data technologies, and then we'll have a polling question to ask you what went wrong at GDT. So here's our scenario. GDT needed several courses developed to support an upcoming product launch. Given that they wanted to use some fairly high-level simulation, they decided they'd better outsource the work. And given the time constraints, they decided to use 2 different vendors in order to get the training done on time. The RFP included the e-learning design and development process documentation and several tools the learning department has used in the past. When all was said and done, the courses were ready for the launch, but ended up taking twice as much project manager time as expected. The vendors had ongoing questions about the operating system and web servers, server-side components, file formats, and file sizes, and on and on. So our question, what went wrong? Go ahead and read the options and make your All right, the answers are coming in. I would agree with the majority here. The correct answer is answer B. The vendors didn't receive standards. If we look at the other distractors, A, nothing. The courses were on time. Well, on time is good, but it's only one measure of success. If we look at distractor C, the vendors couldn't determine the specs. Well, the vendors could certainly make up specs, but this is of no help, right, if they're not the ones that the organization follows. And finally, the choice D, PMs didn't have enough time. It wouldn't have made sense for the project managers to have more time. They would have just been working inefficiently. So clearly the vendors could have been more efficient if they'd received both standards and some templates which already complied with those standards. So let's toggle back here to our e-learning organizational assessment. We're still on the hard copy if you have it. We're still on page 1 at the very bottom. And these are simply reminders of what we just talked about. You want to kind of systematically think through your learning and performance function and ask yourself, do you have the right processes with steps in place? Do you have the right tools in place? Do you have the right standards in place? And really decide. You may have a good start on those, but just need to kind of fill in the gaps or the holes. Any questions on this last topic around processes and tools and standards, or any of the topics we've covered so far today? All righty then. we'll go ahead, and I'm going to ask Matt to take over with our next topic around hosting.
Thanks, Lisa. So for the next couple of slides, we're going to be looking at hosting options and talking about the pros and cons of the choices. And really, the goal here is to just understand some of the trade-offs. As we think about this, I want you to understand that hosting an application like a learning management system is significantly harder than just hosting a regular website because you've got tracking and bookmarking requirements that interact with the database. And you really need to make the right decisions about hosting because otherwise you're not going to meet all of your company's training needs. There's really no sense in building e-learning if you can't get it reliably to your learners. So some of the hosting options include your company's public web server, an application service provider, your company intranet, and a system integrator. So if you host your training from your company's public web server, this means you'll be making it available outside your company's firewall, and that means then you'll be able to get training to external users like customers or partners, which is a good thing. You might need to do sometimes. What might be the drawback, though, of hosting from your company's public web server? One thing, you'll need to take extra steps to secure the training materials because they're not protected by the firewall. But most learning management systems can provide security as a part of the learning management system to overcome this drawback. How about if you host your training with an application service provider or an ASP? In this case, you're hosting with a publicly accessible web server outside your company other than your own website. You might also hear the term SaaS, or Software as a Service Provider, as another name for an ASP. So again, you have the advantage in this case that you could easily deliver training to external users. And you also have the advantage that the ASP has responsibility for monitoring and maintaining the hardware and the application. So this would be a great option for companies that don't have the IT staff or the IT capacity to handle this. If you go this route, there might be some drawbacks in terms of bandwidth. For instance, if most of your employees are located in one area and the application service provider is in another, it may be a slower response time to get the training, or in other words, a longer load time, because there's generally not as much bandwidth across the internet as there is within a local area network. And then potentially another disadvantage could be your company could lose more control over the security of its training and training records when hosted this way because the data is managed by the ASP. How about
I have a question for you.
Sure, go ahead.
If it's hosted by the ASP, how do you lose control of the training records? Because when someone completes an online module, it's going to record it as complete, so how will you lose control over the record?
Okay, so if I understand your question is the system, how might the system might not work properly in that case? And what I'm really getting at in that statement is that if it is hosted on your own servers, then your internal IT department has control over things like security and tape backup to make sure other people don't get access or that the record doesn't get lost. So putting the right contacts in place with the ASP to make them responsible to make sure that they do it right would overcome that drawback. Does that make sense?
All right.
Okay. Okay, how about if you host the training on your company's intranet instead of on any public web server? So in that case, the training could be protected by the company's firewall. In other words, you have increased security. And you have the advantage that if all users are on a single local area network, then the access could be faster. But then you have the drawback that it could be significantly harder to reach external users. In other words, if you want to deliver training to partners or external people, they may not be able to get there without setting up a virtual private network VPN connection. And oftentimes that could be cumbersome as compared to going to a website to access.
We have a question that's come in, Matt, from the audience regarding the losing control of the security, training records, and so forth. Somebody would ask if you could give an example.
So I won't give a specific example from one of our clients, but the idea would be, again, if there would be like a security breach where someone would find a way to hack in and get to your training records that you were trying to keep confidential, that the burden is really on the application service provider rather than your own IT, and it may be harder to manage them in that case. Okay, what about using a system integrator? So if you work with a system integrator, it doesn't necessarily determine where the training is hosted in that case. The system integrator could play the role of managing the learning management system in any of the 3 locations that we've already talked about, or on their own server as well. Really, the role of the system integrator is to customize and configure the learning management system and integrate it to work properly with your other applications, wherever it ends up being hosted at. So, based on these options, what might be the impact of integration between the learning management system and your other enterprise applications? And what I've seen is, though it's not always true, you might find that it's easier to integrate your learning management system with your other applications if you host a learning management system on your own infrastructure. And you might even find in some cases that you couldn't customize your learning management system integration at all if you go with an application service provider who hosts courses using a shared model. So if your learning management system is used by other customers as well as you, you may be limited on what you can customize.
Matt, Carla has raised her hand and has a question. Carla?
Oh, sorry, that was about the previous comment. I just wanted to share that I think where you were going with that, Matt, was the idea that if the resources are kept in-house, you just have greater control than if you go to a vendor. And so things like how you protect that information, or how you, the security processes, or for example, if that company goes out of business, where does that data go? Whereas when it's inside your own 4 walls, you just have a little bit tighter control over it.
Thank you. That's a great way to summarize that. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay, some other things to consider when you look at your options for hosting. One thing that's very important is the licensing model. So again, kind of regardless of where you host, the learning management system vendor may use one of many different methods for licensing, maybe by how many users you have, by how many courses you host, by how much bandwidth you use, or other factors, or a combination of them. So it's going to be very important when you're selecting a learning management system to find a licensing model that's cost-effective for your company. And oftentimes this will come up because you may have a large number of users who need to access lots of different training, but you may also have a large contingent that only ever need to access one course, and you don't necessarily want to have them pay the same fee as the other users. Then I wouldn't want you to forget that in addition to deciding who's going to manage the infrastructure and the learning management system application itself, there's also the question of who's going to handle the learning management system coordination tasks, things like registering users, loading new courses, and generating reports. So you're going to find that some of these tasks could be handled by someone in the learning function who has relatively little experience. Maybe just in addition to the other jobs they're taking, they can take on some of those tasks. But some of the other tasks require more skill, and I think you're going to find that at least occasionally there are going to be tasks that require someone with a strong technology background. So again, you have to figure out, does it make sense to staff these roles with internal people and bring them up to speed, or work with a vendor who has more expertise? So let's take a look at part 4 of our scenario with global data technologies, and then we'll have a polling question. So GDT uses an enterprise-wide learning management system to track employees' compliance with government mandates. The learning management system also delivers training related to consulting skills and product knowledge. At this time, GDT wants to ramp up product knowledge for a new tool suite, which would be sold by contractors provided by a partner company. Due to strict security rules, the partners cannot have access to the learning management system behind the GDT firewall. So the question is, how might training be delivered to these partner-provided contractors? Getting close to receiving most of the votes, and it looks like we have choice C, contract with software as a service provider, aka an ASP provider, in the lead, with work with IT to get by the firewall pretty close second. really, in this case, any of the answers could be the right answer. You probably would need more details to know for sure. But what I would say is that I have seen corporations time and time again choosing A, B, or C because choice D, working with IT to get through the firewall, is more hassle than they think it's going to be. But I guess let's take them kind of one by one and sort of look at what would happen. So if you choose choice A, create the site to host with no learning management system, this would get your contractors the ability to take the training, but without a management system, you might not be able to track at all their assessment results, so you may not know whether they really learned or not once they took the training. If you take choice B, create custom LMS for the course, you're going to accomplish your goal of being able to deliver the training and track it, but that's a kind of expensive approach if you're developing a whole learning management system just for one course. In fact, more often than not, you can usually find an existing learning management system rather than creating a custom one more cost effectively. And then if you choose contract with your provider, then it will make more sense than developing a custom LMS. But again, you really don't want to go through all those steps to set up a contract for one course. In most cases, it makes more sense to set up that for a bunch of courses than one. Okay, let's go back to our assessment, and we'll look at the questions under number 4, which are at the top of page 2. And really, the questions here match the content that I've just covered. And the questions are at a pretty high level, but we find that when we undertake an initiative to help a client select any learning management system, we would expand this out, and we would end up with 20 to 30 pages of requirements and maybe a 40-page RFP that would help determine whether you're selecting the right hosting options and the right learning management system. And the other thing I would say is that many of our clients have a learning management system in place where they can answer yes to some of these things but not others. So it's almost like it's a work in progress that's never all the way finished, that even if you've got a learning management system up and running, that doesn't mean you can't put things in place to push some more things from the no to the yes column. So any questions on this section before I move on to the next section? Okay, next I'm going to move on to a new topic about whether you're tracking the right things and whether you can easily get to the data that you've tracked. And for the purposes of this discussion, I'm not focusing on whether the instructional design of the training is good, but instead assuming that you've taken care of that and looking strategically at what you're tracking. So the first thing I want to do is look at some good reasons to track training, including what you see here: certification and compliance, development plans and career progression, prerequisites for other training, level 1 and level 2 data, and to promote the learning function. So one reason to track training is for certification or compliance data, either whether it would be for external regulation or just an internal mandate. Obviously, if the learning management system is effectively tracking data, you're going to have a much easier time of figuring out who's out of compliance. But I want to dig a little deeper here and get into what types of things might make the learning management system more effective at compliance reporting. So one of the key things to keep in mind about compliance reporting is that it's not enough just to be able to report the scores and completion status of learners who have completed your training. You also are going to have to be able to report on learners who were supposed to take the training and didn't. So this means that your company is going to need a process for managing rules about who needs to take what training. Usually these rules would be set up by job title or by role. So, for example, all job roles need to take such and such training, but only sales managers need to take this other training. And this is where the integration between the learning management system and the HRIS system or payroll system can make all the difference. So if you're not familiar with the term HRIS, this stands for Human Resources Information System. And this is typically a system that contains the information about the employees, what job they're in, all the information about them. So if you don't have the integration between the LMS and the HRIS system, the learning management system is not going to be aware when employees change roles or positions, or when new employees are hired, or when they are no longer active because they're out on leave, unless every update that's made in the HRIS system is made then again manually in the learning management system. So the takeaway here is that integration between the systems can save a ton of time. What about other reasons to track training data? How about for development plans and career progression? So depending on the size and nature of your company, this might be more or less applicable, but certainly in some companies it's going to be appropriate to use training data to help determine when employees are ready for new responsibilities, in other words, performance management. For almost any company, it's going to make sense to be able to track whether prerequisite training has been completed before starting follow-on training. This is going to be even more important if you have a blended learning plan where a learner shouldn't travel to classroom training until some preparatory e-learning has been completed first. And of course, you could use Kirkpatrick Level 1 and Level 2 data to help determine instructor and course effectiveness. Your Level 1 is going to measure the reaction of the learner, and your Level 2 is going to measure whether the learners have learned the content. Depending upon the culture of your organization, another reason to capture tracking data might be to promote the learning function itself. Just keep in mind that you won't likely be able to show that training is effective based only on the data in the learning management system. You'll have to be able to tie training to enhance job performance and positive business results. And you'll need to demonstrate training was a significant part of the better results. So this isn't the type of problem that the learning management system is going to solve on its own. All right, so we've talked about a bunch of things that you should track to make your training effective, but I also want to talk about tracking too much. Are you tracking things that you don't need to track? There are a lot of things that could be tracked which are going to end up wasting time and server space. And what I see is oftentimes when you're putting in a new learning management system, the plan is to try to track and capture everything possible just in case you might need it later, and then only to find out later that there's no one who has time to come back and look at all the data. So to take a specific example, do you really need to know how many times a learner went in and out of a course before attempting the assessment? So I would say there might be some business cases where you really do need to track that. But in most cases, you want to ask yourself, is the data I'm tracking really going to be used to make a change to the way we do things in the future, or is it required by the government? Or if you can't answer yes to that type of question, then you shouldn't waste your time tracking it. And then I want you to consider also the reporting capability of the learning management system. Once all this data is collected, you can only get it out if the learning management system has a good way to report on it. So you're either going to need a system that already has all the reports you need, or has a good tool for allowing non-programmers to create their own reports, or you'll need access to developers who can create new reports for you. And I find that this is one of the stumbling points in a new learning management system, often because lots of other parts of the learning management system work the same for every customer, but once you get to reporting, it's got to be customized to your organization, so there's a lot of work to make good reports. All right, let's take a look at part 5 of our scenario, and then we're going to have another polling question. At GDT, when the LMS implementation project was delayed, the team decided to move integration with HRIS to Phase 2, which was scheduled for 6 months later. Without this integration in place, the LMS was able to track employees who did complete training and whether they received passing or failing scores. However, it was not at all easy to report on employees who never took the training but should have. Which of the following took extra time when GDT needed to demonstrate that employees were in compliance? And I'll note here that this is the first point where you have a choice to pick more than one if you like. All right, it looks like we're getting good responses here, and the majority are saying A and B, and I would agree A and B are harder to do without the HRIS integration, but finding the number of times that a learner took the test could be done with the management system without integration with HRIS. So let's go back to our assessment, and we'll look at Section 5 on page 2.
Before you move on, I just thought I'd mention I have worked in the medical device field, And sometimes the information that we tracked in our LMS was we based it on what was auditable.
Sure, and it makes great sense if something has to be audited. Like if it had to be audited by the FDA, then for sure you need to track it. And I think in that industry you'll find that much more has to be tracked than a lot of other industries. Maybe, I don't know, for banking or something might have as much as well. But we also have clients in the device industry and other areas within medical that not only need to track courses that they're taking, but need to all day, every day be reading documents and tracking in the system that they've read those documents. All of that is auditable by the FDA. So that's a good point. So in this section, really, the first 4 questions are about covering your bases, making sure you're tracking the things that you need to track. And then the last question is about making sure that you're not wasting time tracking things that you don't need to track. And again, you could delve into a much deeper level, but at least this gives you a checklist at the baseline to check to see if your training tracking is effective. So are there any other questions at this point before we move on to the next section?
Yes, I have a question.
Sure.
You had said that the tracking ends up being somewhat specific to the company. I know this is kind of but it sounds like to a certain extent the tracking is going to be somewhat related via industry. Now I know you several vendors providing all sorts of different tools, but it sounds like again if you could get it to some customizable per industry, then the tracking situation should be pretty similar.
So what typically happens is that some learning management systems are better than others at understanding or allowing you to customize your organizational hierarchy, because generally when you are able to track what people are doing, you want to be able to report on it by your business units, things like group, division, location, and so on. And oftentimes you'll find a split because you may need to track training again for your employees who fall under those organizational structures. But if you want to track training from your partners or customers or contractors, they don't fall in that organizational structure. So it's just the exercise of figuring out what buckets do we want these things reporting in, and if we want to be able to see a summary by how much are we in compliance within this division versus that division, you've got to do a lot of thinking to make sure that your reporting is set up properly so that the reporting means something when you go back to look at it. That's kind of what I was getting at.
Thank you. That makes a lot of sense.
Okay, next we're going to look at keeping your learning management system on track. So after you put a ton of effort ensuring that your learning management system is going to meet all your needs, you might find that an unanticipated issue throws the whole project off track. And I've heard some horror stories, and also in some cases I've come in as a consultant to help clean up some messes where improper planning during an LMS transition costs companies a considerable amount of money. And this slide shows the train going off the track, but the train is still in pretty good shape. We could also imagine a scenario where the train comes to a section where the bridge is out and the train is going over the edge. So just with that backdrop in mind, let's talk about how to keep your LMS on track. So first, I'm going to say important. Be sure to follow your SCORM and AICC and W3C standards when you're developing your e-learning. You never want to assume that if the training works on your current learning management system, then everything is fine. Training developed today is often going to have to run on a different learning management system in the future. This could happen when your organization acquires a smaller one or is acquired by a larger one that has a different technical infrastructure. Or the need for training to work on another learning management system might occur because your current LMS vendor goes out of business and you just don't have a way to get updates, or if it just becomes not cost-effective or other business requirements change. And we're finding more and more that it might be because you need to deliver training before always to laptops and PCs, and now you need to deliver training to mobile devices, and your learning management system doesn't have that capability. So these reasons mean your training must be built on standards so it can move from one learning management system to another with as little hassle as possible. So the SCORM and AICC standards are e-learning specific, about making sure that as you move your training records and your training from one system to another, it will work on those learning management systems. The W3C people might not be as familiar with. W3C stands for World Wide Web Consortium, and this consortium has quite a number of working groups, notably one that sets the standards for HTML. In general, your open standards like HTML are better than standards which belong to a particular technology vendor. So a couple of years ago, almost all e-learning developers would have counted on Adobe Flash running on almost every computer. But now, with the transition to mobile, it's not as clear that Flash is always going to be the go-to technology for delivering interactive e-learning. And HTML5 is gaining traction, which is what is making the W3C important. So when picking standards for the learning management system, whether or for the learner's computer or anywhere in between, really, you need to consider not only the current infrastructure, but also how the infrastructure may change in the future. Next, do make sure that the learning management system is easy to use. So even if everything technically is working, another way that the management system can go off the track is if it isn't easy enough for learners or coordinators to use. And here, having looked at lots of different learning management systems, I've seen that a task that takes 1 or 2 steps in one learning management system might take 10 steps to do that same task in another learning management system just because of the ease of use of the user interface. Another source of problems could be you build that relationship with the LMS vendor, they go out of business. And so what I would say is you got to look at a lot of different factors to determine whether the LMS vendor is going to be around for you in the future. Things like the length of time they've been in business and their number of clients and so on, their similarity to your industry. But one of the things that I normally suggest is to select a vendor whose core business is learning management systems. If you select a vendor that does a lot of other things as well, and the learning management system is just kind of an add-on business for them, there's no guarantee that they're going to continue to offer learning management systems. And even if they do, you don't know if they're going to put as much effort into it as the real learning management system companies do. And technology changes so fast, it's important that your provider can change fast with it. And then I'd say also make sure that your learning management system supports both custom e-learning and off-the-shelf e-learning. Some learning management systems are biased more towards one or the other, and a lot of times when companies first select a learning management system, they think, oh, we're going to develop it all ourselves, or we're going to buy all off the shelf. You got to assume that even if that's the case at the outset, it might not be the case later. Okay, let's look at part 6 of our scenario with global data technologies. GDT has plenty of staff who have programming backgrounds. Once the programmers found that the learning management system they use has built-in tools for authoring assessments, they decided they could build the assessments by partnering with instructional designers who will ensure the assessments are instructionally sound. They do not see any need to work with learning technology experts on the programming side of things because the LMS tools are so easy. They eventually create over 700 assessments using this approach. Did GDT come out ahead by using the assessment authoring tools built into the learning management system? All right, good. This one is interesting because now we have a fair mix of answers. So, and here it depends kind of over time. Initially, global data technologies did come out ahead because they were able to program lots of assessments with little effort and without incurring any cost for consultants. The internal team of programmers and instructional designers were able to ensure that the assessments worked properly and that the questions were properly written. So what went wrong over time? Well, global data technologies continued to develop assessments using this approach for years and then had the 700 assessments created this way, and they reached or other requirements forced them to move to a new learning management system. No one at Global Data Technologies had realized that using the built-in authoring tool had led to courses that were not SCORM compliant. So even though the courses were even though the learning management system was SCORM compliant, using that built-in authoring tool took away the SCORM compliance, and thus all 700 assessments had to be recreated again in a new tool. All right, let's flip back over to our assessment, and now we're looking at question number 6 at the bottom of page 2. Are you avoiding common learning management system issues? So as you scan through the questions in this section, you'll note that one of the common themes here is ensuring that the learning management system will work not only now, but also in the future as requirements change. Any questions here before we start to talk about authoring tools? Okay, so different authoring tools provide different capabilities and require different skills, obviously, and the tool choices change frequently. So there are numerous factors, and it can be overwhelming to figure out which tools your organization should be using. You're going to need to pick a tool that's designed for the task you're trying to do, and you're going to also need to pick a tool that doesn't require more programming skill than your people have. So what we do is we divide the authoring tools into 4 categories: formatting, authoring, scripting, or programming. So formatting is for displaying text or graphics and presenting content without interactivity. Authoring we consider to be displaying content with low to medium levels of interactivity that is supported through the tool's user interface without writing any code. Scripting is for medium to high levels of interactivity that requires writing code in a scripting language that does not have to be compiled. And then programming, the same level of interactivity but in a programming language that does need to be compiled. And the reason why we differentiate between compiled or not is that generally a computer language that does need to be compiled takes more programming skill to use than one that does not need to be compiled. And a compiler is a computer program that takes text written in a computer source language and compiles it into the target language. So it's probably more detail than you need. You just need to know programming takes more skill than scripting.
Hey, Matt, this is Brian. I just had a really quick question about this slide.
Sure.
Can you, for the audience, can you give everyone an example of, what programs you're talking about out there, like for formatting or authoring, like PowerPoint or Captivate?
Actually, I'll address that on the next slide, so I'll hold until I get there. I just have a couple other notes on this slide, and I'll pull that up.
Okay.
So, one thing is a note of caution. Some learning management system providers may provide an authoring tool with their product, and they may lead you to believe that if that authoring tool is built in, that's going to be the only tool that you need to use. But you don't want to fall into that trap because all authoring tools have different strengths and weaknesses, so it's very likely you're going to need multiple tools. Also, you want to be aware that once you pick your primary authoring tool, the thing that you're developing the most of the course in, you're still going to have elements probably that need to be developed in other tools, things like audio, video, software simulation, and graphics, which you may need other tools to augment the main tool. So the chart I've brought up now will answer partly the question that was just raised. What I'm showing here is tools that fall into each of the 4 categories, and I have them arranged from left to right such that the tools on the left are simpler and less powerful, and the tools on the right are more complex and more powerful. Now you're going to notice right away that some of the tools span across more than one category because the elements that they use could be used in multiple ways. And I have to note, too, that the ranking of a tool's capability and complexity is subjective, so there's no absolute right place to put them on the chart. But if you look at the tools on the left, the basic skills to use these tools could be picked up relatively quickly, and almost anyone can develop the skill to use them. But if you go to the tools on the far right, it could take years to become proficient at using these tools, and some people just don't have the aptitude for them at all. So common mistakes when you're selecting your authoring tools, an ineffective approach would be choosing tools that are not powerful enough to handle the type of training desired. In other words, using only PowerPoint when you want something that is very highly interactive. Or the reverse, an inefficient approach. If you choose a tool that's too complex to handle the type of training desired, in other words, if you go and you do lots and lots of JavaScript programming when really you could have accomplished the same training just using Articulate Presenter without needing the programming skill. Then after we've looked at that range of tools, I want to talk about the specific suite of tools, and I'm saying suite rather than tool at this point because where I said you're going to need more than one tool. But what you don't want is lots of overlap or gaps, like 2 different tools that do really essentially the same thing. You'd rather have your organization standardize on one of those. And I see companies do odd things with this. Sometimes they'll say, okay, we want to do high-end simulation, but we want to be able to update and edit the training with our own people. And they have minimal experience, so we're going to use only Lectora. And again, this just doesn't add up because Lectora by itself isn't necessarily going to get the level you want, and you could integrate it together with Flash to do more complex interactions, but then it no longer would be easily updated by the people without the high skill level. Other things you want to consider, you want to match to the types of learning you need to create, soft skill system training or product training. So if you're doing software simulations, things like Captivate and Camtasia are some great tools to use. And then we talked a little bit about translation earlier. If you find the authoring tool that makes translation as simple as possible, you may find that you can save quite a bit of money. At the basic level, you need to determine if the authoring tool supports the languages you need. And if you have languages that are what's called the double byte character set, things where the alphabet is different than English, like Japanese or Korean, then it's very important to find that your authoring tools can support that. And then there's timing priorities and the level of skill needed. The cost of purchasing, oftentimes the cost of purchasing the authoring tools, while they may seem expensive at hundreds to thousands of dollars per license, oftentimes that ends up being minuscule compared to the number of hours of labor that you pay for to get e-learning developed. And then just like with the learning management system, with authoring tools as well, you want to be worried about the longevity of the provider. Are they going to be around? And it's very important that you're standardized within your company and that your tools work well with your e-learning infrastructure. Okay, part 7 of the scenario. At GDT, one of the members who had worked on a major ERP project, Enterprise Resource Planning project, for a number of years, assumed that part of the responsibility for selecting authoring tools. His background in instructional design was very weak, and he really didn't understand that there were other types of training that people would need besides learning how to use new software programs. What authoring tool do you think he said could handle all of the GDT training needs, and do you think he was right? All right, make your final selection there. Okay, so I'm seeing about 20% on B, and C a little lower, and D the most. And again, I would agree. Looks like the wisdom is with the majority. He chose Captivate because all of his experience had been with software demonstration and simulation. So he thought this tool can do anything I needed to do. But without having experience with other types of training, he didn't realize that might not be the best tool for everything else. All right, I'm going to take us back to our assessment for your organization, the questions under section 7 on page 3. So this section, are you choosing the right authoring tool? And I've summarized this question set by saying that there are many factors that can determine what tools you should choose, and you really want to consider all of the factors before making your choice. So, Lisa, that's kind of a wrap on this section.
Matt, thank you. That was just terrific. You know, every time I'm in the same room with Matt for a little while, I learn something new. We're near the end of our session here, so I'd like to open it up to questions either about the last topic here, about tools, or about any of the other topics that we've covered today. Who would like to ask a question?
Hi, this is Linda Jack.
Hi, Linda.
How are you?
Good. Go ahead.
Good session. I guess I have a question. From the last slide or two, were you saying that Lectora or Articulate are not powerful enough to create good e-learning?
So I would answer that question at first by saying definitely not. They are powerful enough to create good e-learning. And I also would match that up with saying that at the beginning when you start out to develop e-learning, you may figure, I'm going to pick one tool and use it for the entire course, and I will build the entire course using that tool. But you may later on, as you develop more, say, I'm going to use a mix of tools. So oftentimes what we will do is use a Lectora or articulate presenter type tool for the bulk of the course, and in sections where we want more interactivity, augment it with another tool like Flash. But beyond that, the other thing I would say is it depends upon your level of interactivity that you're trying to reach, because many courses only need to achieve a level of interactivity that you could easily achieve in Articulate Presenter or Lectora, in which case you want to choose those tools rather than Flash, because otherwise you're wasting time and skill on something, in a harder programming language when you could accomplish it in Articulate or Lectora.
Now, by any chance, have you heard anything about Storyline, which is, I guess, going to be like a fly paper but for Articulate?
Yes. Actually, we met with the community manager for Articulate. She was at our local ISPI meeting. And then since then I've followed kind of what's going on. And I'm very interested in that to see how it's going to come along. But I think it's going to still fall in a spot where if you need to achieve maximum level of control and capability, you would still go to a tool like Flash or HTML and JavaScript, which is more complex. But you always want to walk that balance and say, if I could do it with an easier tool, let's do it with an easier tool. And that's going to fall in that category. So I think that what I see there and what I see in Lectora are a nice mix between ease of use and power. They fall nicely in the middle and allow you capability in both of those areas.
Thank you.
Well, and I think, you really need to link it back to your learning objectives. So choosing your tool and thinking about that interactivity level, you need to link back to, using these and using this kind of interactivity, can we achieve the learning objectives?
So are you saying you get less interactivity with Flash? Is that it?
More interactivity with Flash, but more responsibility to be able to do the programming yourself in Flash.
Okay.
Thanks, Linda.
Thank you.
Who else has a question today?
Hi, this is Elaine Eccles. As we look at translating and developing for, outside of the United States, one thing that I'm running into or problem is taking a U.S.-developed course, which is very good, and just translating it. It does not, in my opinion, flow very well in that country. Do you have any suggestions on how to maybe develop any scenarios on what you've done to make sure that the learners outside of the U.S. are grasping the knowledge as we would like to as their counterparts here in the United States?
So it sounds like they're struggling a little bit more culturally with the content and the examples rather than from technical trouble you're facing?
Absolutely.
Yeah. I think one of the, what you want to do is pair up with some type of subject matter expert that really knows that culture. Because it's possible you could just make some simple tweaks to your existing. It's usually in the exercises and the activities where it becomes a problem or more challenging or not appropriate. So I would suggest getting with somebody that's an expert in that specific culture and seeing if there's some simple, easy things you can do to just tweak the exercises a little bit.
Also, I would say you could go back to your standards and your tools where you have a style guide where you're documenting what things you should do when you create the first version of the course. You can have rules in there that leave out things that you know are going to cause problems when you create the translated versions. And in fact, we have some clients where we do quite a bit of work for English and for Latin America where we develop the first version is closer to what the other version is going to be.
Right, and I think that was the first iteration that we did. And as we move into additional countries, we're just finding it's so I'm constantly thinking outside of the box. I was trying to think, do we partner with a university or something along those lines? And the first comment I got, well, no one ever does that. And I'm thinking, okay.
Well, the other thing is we have clients who have thought through this quite a bit, and you have a choice on your end whether you develop the English version and all the translated versions, or whether you develop the English version so that it's easy to translate, and then you deploy it to other countries to let it be translated there, where they have the freedom to make some changes to it. So that's an option.
They do it from a local standpoint.
Right, and then we did think about that, but then it's the control and the changes. As products changes, as processes change. How do we...
That's a challenge.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's like setting up an entire, another L&D area in each of the countries. And I'm not sure they're ready to go there yet.
Yeah.
But that is, it looks like, that's what we're going to end up having to do. So thanks for your input.
Yeah, I don't think you're alone there, Elaine. Thank
you.
Another question today.
Since there's silence, this is Elaine. I'm going to jump back in.
Sure.
iPads, iPods, the cloud. Do you want to speak to training along those lines and using that technology?
Well, from a technology perspective?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so one of the biggest factors with iPad and iPhone is the fact that Apple has decided not to support Flash, which again has been one of the traditional mediums for delivering to computers for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
So there are some tools like Lectora which already delivered to HTML, so that's a choice. Also, it's kind of a little-known fact that you could still use Flash to develop e-learning as long as you would package it together as an app and deliver it as an app instead of through the browser-based interface.
Okay.
So that's an option. And then there's just a myriad of authoring tools that are recently released or on the horizon and more coming over the course of the next few years. And one of the things that you want to look for, there are some tools that will allow you to develop once and publish for lots of different devices. And I think you're going to find in the future that's very helpful because right now it's quite a bit of work to develop once and then figure out how do I make it work on Android and iPhone and Windows 7 phone and so on. And the authoring tools that can take care of that hassle for you and let you just worry about content and they handle getting it all to all the devices.
Mm-hmm.
If you pick the right tools that handle that, you're going to make your life a lot easier.
And I think in general, we're seeing really just wonderful opportunity from a performance standpoint, performance support standpoint in addition to learning. At the end of the day, what we care about is that employees are able to perform better, not just they completed some training.
Absolutely.
So we're really excited about all the opportunities coming with tablets and smartphones and whatnot.
And last question, have you done anything in a virtual world type scenario?
So avatars and that kind of thing?
Absolutely.
Relation?
Mm-hmm. And from a training and an educational standpoint?
Yes.
Not gaming.
We have some examples where, for instance, a learner would look around the room and make choices about what is for a sales rep, what should they upsell in that room to their client.
Yes.
But we tend to aim for the more practical rather than the more snazzy unless it's warranted.
Okay.
Thanks for chiming in, Elaine.
Thank
Anyone
you.
have a kind of their biggest aha they'd like to share after the last 90 minutes of this webinar? What's your biggest aha? Oh, all right. Well, do you feel like you have a better idea of how to start down this e-learning path? And can you see how this is, just a stepping stone to something more robust? I hope you're saying in your own mind at this point that the answers to all those questions are yes. And at this point, I'll turn it back over to Roger to wrap us up for today.
Okay, well, looks like we hit the mark pretty close here, and thank you very much, Lisa and Matt. Great session. And we want to thank all of you who joined us today on the line. This has been great. Our contact information is on the screen, and we invite you, again, to contact us with any questions or thoughts or any further comments, and really to start thinking about your e-learning strategy. Now, you're going to receive a link to a short survey shortly following the session. And again, we'd appreciate it if you took time to fill that out and send us your feedback, if you would. And again, we'll also send you the link to the YouTube version of this session early next week. And now to leave you with a final thought from American humorist Arnold Lassalle. Success is simple. Do what's right, the right way, at the right time. Thanks again, everyone, and have a great day.
Thank you.